What's up, fight fans? Thanks for checking out my YouTube channel. I think you're going to enjoy this interview with Laura Sanko, who's ready to make her big debut as part of our UFC commentary team at UFC Fight Night this week. I've worked with Laura since season 1 of Dana White's Contender series back in 2017. Grateful to call her a friend and really pumped to see her grow into this new role. It's one that she has been desiring for a long time. If you love the UFC, I hope you'll hit that subscribe button for me. I'm trying to make the best content that I can for fight fans, interviews, behind the scenes, and much more. Thanks for all the support. It's a big start of 2023 for you.
It is. It's a really big start. And it's actually something I've known about since September. So
wow.
Yeah, it's been hard. It's been hard to not talk about it.
Yeah. Okay. So the announcement is Laura, color commentary for a UFC Fight Night card, February 4th, Lewis versus Spivak.
Yes.
And you found out about it in September. So I just kind of want to go through this and unpack it if you want to.
Yeah.
What was it like to find out about it in September? That's pretty far in advance usually.
It was pretty cool. It was pretty cool. And it was not unlike when I found out I was going to be calling Contender series for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of sudden and somewhat unexpected, but a little bit of me putting myself out there and making a case, but then of course not knowing if that was going to be received well or not. And then, you know, it's kind of one of those things where I'll never forget where I was when Zach called me and said, "Hey, you know, Craig and I and Dana talked about this, and we feel like it's the right move, and we're ready to switch you officially into this slate," which is why you've seen me do a lot less and less and less reporting,
right,
over the past few months. Everybody's like, "Did you get fired?" I was like, "No." No.
So you're moving into that. So, but you kind of you made like after calling Contender series for 2 seasons now.
Yeah.
Were you just kind of like, I want to do it now. I'm ready.
Yeah, I did. And I think in any situation like that, it's such a tricky thing because, you know, the squeaky wheel gets the grease, but the annoying wheel gets drowned out, right? So you have to ride that line of like making a case for things that you feel like you can do. And the most important thing is I knew I could demonstrate that I could add value to the broadcast. And that's the most important thing in what we do, right? It's not about me and what I want, you know, from their perspective, certainly not. It's about how can I make the UFC product even just a modicum better or more well-rounded, not necessarily even better in this case, but more well-rounded. And so I put that case forth to Dana, and I it's such a funny thing because conversations with him are always, I'm never entirely sure how he's going to read me approaching him, but I basically laid out a case, and he kind of was like, "I thought we were already doing this."
Yeah, like so it is funny. Like he does have his hands in everything in terms of the product, but then other times too, I think he's just like, isn't that happening already?
Yeah, because if you remember, after when I made the jump and started calling fights for Contender series, he did a series of interviews, and I think someone asked him whether that meant I would also be doing Fight Night, and he's like, "Yeah, you know, she'll be doing that by the end of the year." So I kept my mouth shut and waited, and the end of the year happened, and then the whole next year happened, and I was finally just like, you know what? I'm just going to put myself out there again and see what the response is. But it was, like I said, it was most important that I had 2 years at that point of demonstrating my capabilities. It wasn't just like I was asking for something, or not even asking, but just making a case for something that I had no business making a case for. I felt like there was enough hay in the barn, so to speak, at that point to be like, "Hey, can we give this a shot?"
Yeah. Do you view your kind of journey with the UFC? I view mine as like 0 to 60.
Yeah.
I called Contender series in my role for 4 shows on an 8 first season, and then I was doing play-by-play, like, you know, 3 months after that, 4 months after that, and then I was just, because of timing, really, was just the second guy. Then all of a sudden, it was like Anik pay-per-views, big shows, me, fight nights. How do you view yours? Because there's been different layers to it.
Yeah, it hasn't felt that way to me. It's funny because a lot of people from the outside seem to have that perception, and questions get sort of phrased that way to me a lot whenever I'm doing an interview about me. And it always kind of takes me by surprise because to me, it has not felt fast at all. But that's probably because, what people end up seeing is the end product when I've actually finally made whatever it is I'm trying to do, whether it was my initial trying to work for the UFC, whether it was, trying to do a spot on the desk, whatever it was. I think the problem is that people are only seeing the successes because that's what makes it to air, right? But
Right.
I've been covering MMA in some respect or another and trying to do, I would not call this commentary, but fight breakdown since 2010. So
Wow. Even I didn't
been,
know that. Yeah.
yeah. I actually, I don't know if you can call it a job if you don't get paid to do it, but you do it for free.
Sure.
I did it for tickets. So when Titan was in Kansas City, Titan Fighting used to have almost all of their shows in Kansas City, and I really wanted to be there. I wanted to be Octagon-side and like in the action. And so I kind of made this deal with some blog at the time. I don't even remember what it was. And I was like, hey, I will type out blow by blow recaps of these fights and I'll send them to you guys. You guys can post them if you just get me a ticket to the fights and I can sit like Octagon-side. And they had a, connection with the promotion. And so that's kind of how I started doing it. And they were horrendous. I was literally sitting there with my laptop going, so-and-so threw a left hand and then so-and-so went for a takedown. And then
So you were doing this on Twitter or just like you were going to give this to them
this was
after?
probably before Twitter, right?
Like
I don't
a
remember
blog.
Twitter,
Well, 2010 Twitter
definitely
was like
before I was
2
on
or 3
Twitter.
years old at that point. Yeah. But you were just like, I want to be in it in some regard.
Yeah.
But back then are you still in venture capitalist?
I was I was an amateur, and yes, I was still working in VC stuff. So it was like another extension of my very dangerous hobby. So I was training, I was fighting as an amateur, but I already knew that I wanted to not just participate in the sport, but cover the sport and articulate the sport, I guess is a good way to put it. And so that was really my first foray into that. And then, I can tell you countless stories of success and failure that have happened in the last 13 years.
Yeah. And now, was that just because you were so obsessed with the sport that you were like, I don't care what comes of this. I'm just like, it's almost like if you're just getting into painting, you're like, I'm going to go to every museum I can, and then I'm going to go to the local art place and just talk to the guy who knows stuff. Not because I'm going to be a pro artist someday, just because I love the hell out of it right now. Is that what it was for you?
That's exactly what it was for me. Exactly what it was. And especially too, you got to put yourself back in that time period because this sport has grown.
Yeah, it wasn't on Fox yet. I always
Fox.
say 2011 was when it got to Fox Sports, and even still, how much growing did it have to do? But
100%. And then even the female side of things, there weren't women in the UFC.
Not in the UFC,
yet. We were
right?
Still years away from that. And so, from my perspective as an athlete and as just someone who loved MMA in general, this was never about ending up on television. That was never going to happen in my wildest imagination.
Yeah.
It was never about any amount of money or fame because that wasn't even really a thing. It wasn't a realistic career path for me, whether it be broadcasting or as a fighter. That really wasn't even an option at the time. I just loved the sport. I loved what it did for me as a person, what it did for me mentally, and I was just obsessed, as you say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those things are great, though. I see it now. Like your son is second grade, my son's 7. So it's like you see that when they just get obsessed with something and they just want to do everything related to it. And it's like
Fortnite.
It should never leave. It should never leave. You know what I mean? We should all find those things that change over the years. Also, back then, the old media rules were still in play. Like YouTube channels and podcasts and things were just like you couldn't just be like, yes, I'm going to get in media because I have an iPhone.
Yeah.
And that, and now it's just a totally different thing. When did you start working for Invicta?
Oh, that's a good question. I started working for Invicta. It would have been Invicta FC 9. So I think that was early 2015. I could be getting that date wrong, but right.
And that's when you start doing like the reporting or the interviews afterwards.
Yes. So my first foray into television, although not on CBS or NBC or anything like
Sure.
that, it still felt very big because it was live.
Yeah.
I'd never done anything like that before. And I did my best to kind of prepare myself for it. I grabbed a friend who had a camera and we went to some local amateur shows and I tried to do some post-fight interviews. And I'm sure that footage exists somewhere, and I'm sure it's just absolutely laughable. But I would already then I knew that because I was so inexperienced, I had to do whatever it took to just beg, borrow, and steal experience, credibility, whatever it was. I was willing to try anything, and that's kind of something I'm still doing to this day. I'm doing crazy things to try to make myself better prepared for this role.
Like what?
So I'm still in the process of working this out with him, but there's a guy in the industry who's, in my opinion, one of the best tape study guys that's out there. And his name's Barry Robinson, phenomenal striking coach. And I've always followed his content and appreciated it. But what I really love about his stuff is he just has an eye for seeing the bigger picture and the bigger strategy and things. And I know that when I'm calling fights, and you probably know this from calling fights with me, my grappling knowledge is great. I love, I can identify submissions coming, going, I can be predictive with it. Striking was never my main martial art.
Mm-hmm.
I can definitely call fights. I can certainly see patterns in striking, but I just wanted to be even better in that realm. So I basically hired him to teach me how to better watch tape. I watch a shit ton of tape as it is, but if there's ways for me to do it either more efficiently or more thoroughly or extract better information, then I want to do that. So I'm basically taking lessons in that.
Yeah.
Also.
No, that's good. I mean, everybody does have the DC Olympic wrestler, right? Bisping, known as a guy with a big punch more often, and even just the card that I called recently with Dom Cruz. Now, well-rounded guy, Dom Cruz, but he does have a lot of wrestling experience, more so than Felder. So when they're on the ground, I specifically went to Cruz a couple of times to say, what does he need to do here? But yeah, like everyone has their specialty, and then you can always build on it. You know what's crazy too is like it's still so MMA is still just so young in that regard, where watching film for you, correct me if I'm wrong, is like putting on a fight and then just like maybe you pause it, maybe you rewind it, but really just watching a fight with whatever TV angles there are. Is that correct? Is that how you do it?
Yeah, I do it with certain objectives though, especially for Contender Series and Road to UFC. It's always interesting because they're guys I've never seen before usually.
Mm-hmm.
Totally fresh. I have no preconceived notions about who they are as a fighter and what their strengths and weaknesses are. So what I try to figure out are, our patterns,
right?
Tendencies, patterns, whether they be striking, whether they be position wise, footwork wise, whatever it is, because if I see that in more than one, more than two, more than three fights, then come time when I'm calling their fight, I have a better chance of being predictive with what's going to happen and or just providing a better picture of why this person's doing this.
Yeah.
There's a few times where like guys will do stuff that maybe is technically wrong, but it works for them. And I only know that it works for them because I've watched an inordinate amount of footage.
Yeah. So if you see them doing this incorrectly or by the book, you'd be like, yeah, but this is where they're feeling comfortable right now. This is where they want the fight. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
But and then another wrinkle though of what I was saying is like you just put on fights is like in basketball, and I'm sure this exists in football too. And like I remember talking to a college basketball coach, and he just like opened up his film thing, and it was like you can just filter in and just be like all of their left side screen and rolls from the high block.
I wish.
In the second half of a game. And then it would just play. And then it's just like everything in the database, right? Yeah. So you could just go like, okay, bottom position, guard close, full guard. And then just like you see all of their work. Like that doesn't exist yet.
Wouldn't you know what I mean?
It's like maybe we'll fast forward the sport a little bit, but can you imagine?
Maybe all these commentators can pool some money together and hire someone, some farm to start doing this, because what you're
it's like a whole software thing.
Oh my God, what you're describing would be the holy grail. But to your
Right.
point, yes, no, that does not exist. So
No.
it's
Yeah.
just watching a lot of fights and in a pretty inefficient way. But
Yeah. Yeah.
what you gotta do.
Well, a lot of people ask too, and they're just like, well, how do you prepare? And it's just like, I don't know. Like, if you were going to look up Julian Erosa, what would you do? Would you Google his name and then see what's out there? You know?
Oh,
And like, we have more things uh, at our hand. We have UFC Fight Pass, obviously, and then I can like text Julian. I can look up his
yeah.
number and whatever. So that sort of thing. But it's just a lot of get on YouTube, get on Google, look them up, see what's written, try to track them down. So you start doing. When did you talk to Dana at Invicta? When was that fateful
Hmm.
experience when Dana's at an Invicta and you said, "I'm going to work for you someday"?
Yeah, that would have only been 2 or 3 shows. So I'd only ever done 2 or 3 Invicta shows at that point, only doing post-fight in-cage interviews and an occasional sideline interview.
Yeah,
But again, this is like my 3rd show. And yeah, we found out, at least I found out last minute. I think everybody found out last minute that he was going to show up because it was when they were thinking of adding Cyborg to the roster. And she was the main event of the card. And I think they kind of wanted to, scout, see her fight, probably talk
yeah,
to her afterwards. And so my producer got in my ear. He's like, "Hey, Dana White's here. You need to go interview him." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, okay."
yeah,
It was so overwhelming because I had been a fan of the sport for so long, and I've been watching him for years, and it's kind of one of those surreal moments where it's like, all right, well, I guess I'm going to go interview one of my I don't know if I would call him an idol, but someone I certainly had looked to in this industry for a very, very long time. And I also know that he's maybe not like he is warm, but I don't know how to describe his person. He's intense. He's
yes,
very intense.
yeah, yeah.
And that can be a little intimidating at times. And pardon me if I've told you this. Have I told you this story before about what happened?
And I forgot it if you did.
Yeah. So it's Invicta. It's not a UFC production. We have a
Yeah.
lot fewer people, a lot fewer camera people. Long story endless. The camera guy didn't get the message to meet me where Dana was to do the interview quickly and
Oh, so you're
efficiently.
just standing.
We're just 10 minutes, maybe more. And you know how much Dana loves to wait.
Oh, well, I was just gonna say, if it was 10 minutes, now in hindsight, you can probably know, well, he
Oh,
probably already liked me or was okay with the whole situation, because if he wasn't, then he would have been bolting out of
it
after 2
it was
minutes.
just good luck on my part that I think he was having a relaxing night because it wasn't his show. He was just there to
Yeah,
enjoy it. And both Fertitta brothers were there as well, like sitting right next to where I was talking to Dana. So
yeah,
I did my very best to have charming, polite, small talk without making it awkward, but it went on and on and on. And in the back of my head, I'm like freaking out, like I can't believe it. We're making this guy wait so long. This is going to be such a rough interview now, but it was good. And then after just a quick interview about the evening and about Chris and whatnot. And again, I don't know what made me do it, but when we were done, I said, "Listen, I know I'm new to this, but I'm going to work for you one day. I really want to work for you one day." And he was sort of like, we'll keep an eye on you." He was very kind about it, but it
sure.
wasn't like sure,
Right, right,
sign
right.
us up right now.
Yeah.
And it was a lot of those moments really of me just sort of calling my shot, so to speak, over many, many years to get to this point.
What did you have in mind when you said, "I'm gonna work for you someday"? What did you think that was?
Anything, anything.
That wasn't a specific role. That was just like, I wanna do what I'm doing, and I wanna take it to the top level of this
Yes,
sport.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah. And I just knew that I could. I knew that I could participate and further the story and be a part of the team. I knew I was capable of it, and I knew that I would be good at it and would bring maybe a different skill set than they had currently. And I don't know. I guess I just had the chutzpah to just
Yeah.
say it.
Well, I don't mean this literally, but young and dumb is a great thing to be sometimes,
Oh no, I was
like
both. I was both
yeah,
for
yeah,
sure.
like, you get into something, and I remember thinking, gosh, I think after the Fresno show that I called my first UFC play-by-play, and I just remember being like, I don't even know if I can get better than this. Like, I just crushed that. Like, there are certain calls I was like, I just crushed that. Like, that was good, you know?
Like, does it get better?
And then now I like look back. I don't think I actually thought that, but like, I just remember thinking like, I am a natural at this. Like, this is my thing now. Cause I really love it. And it turns out I'm pretty good at it. And now I look back and I'm just like,
yeah.
It's like your voice is different, like, because you're, you know, the confidence is different. And I wasn't super confident. I knew that I could do the show, but Contender series is quite a bit different from a 6.5 hour thing that was on cable sports television. To that point in my career, I had never been on a network to that regard. So no, it's just different. But when you're just into it, you're just like, I'm just gonna crush it.
It's
like,
funny how our voices change, isn't it? Because UFC Connected did like a little mini doc about basically the stuff that you and I talked about last time I was on your show, and they pulled a clip of my first ever UFC camera appearance.
Nice.
And oh God, it's so bad. I'm like, hey guys, I'm here in Salt Lake City, and
I think it's a weird thing. It's like, but I even listened to my voice on the Fresno thing, and I was 8 years in of a professional broadcast career at that point. Now, not in play-by-play and not in the sport, not where you're really coming on, but you just grow accidentally. You just grow accidentally, and then you look back and you just go, oh, well, it's a good thing I was confident back then, because if I wasn't, then I probably wouldn't have made it this far anyways.
Yeah, and I can think of some very specific times along the way where I completely fell on my face, you know, several of them. There was one interview I did with, so embarrassing to talk about, but I'll say it because it's true. There was one interview I did with Dana that was so bad that Zach called me and asked me to apologize to him. Can you imagine? It doesn't get worse than that.
Well, when was that?
Oh, I don't even want to talk about it, but I will.
Oh, you don't have to.
No, it's fine. It's fine. My inexperience, like I just read the moment so wrong. And I was so focused on not screwing up the information that I wanted to, you know.
Was this like 2018?
Probably. It was the 25th anniversary in Denver.
No, that's what I was the guy. You don't have to go into it.
You know what I'm talking about. See, it's so bad you know the interview I'm talking about.
Well, I just remember what you're talking about, because then, like, I just remember well, that was a weird show, and that was a weird thing. But I do remember that. I also think too, at that point, you are 3 years into being a TV broadcaster.
Well, and so I only interviewed Dana
a handful of times because you're on fight nights. Yeah, so it's like he's not there all the time
at that point. And so the nerves definitely kicked in, and like,
well, I just remember, so that was like, we're coming off of the big fight with Korean Zombie and Yair Rodriguez and the huge elbow. And I think the major issue was that you didn't start with that.
Yeah.
Like, you didn't start with that amazing main event and that fight we had and whatever. You kind of went 25th anniversary. And then did you go like through the card almost?
I may have. I may have. But I feel like I realized pretty quickly, because I think his look on his face was like, I cannot believe you're asking me about the 25th anniversary when one of the most incredible elbow
fights just happened. Right. Yeah, you took too long to get to that.
I did
get to that fight one.
Yeah.
But I will say this too. You know, the 25th anniversary show is one of the bigger shows that I've done. And I remember thinking, I can't believe it. I'm not even a year in, and I'm doing the 25th anniversary show in Denver when we're doing the old graphics and whatever.
Yeah.
Now, the week before, they were in Madison Square Garden, and that was like the real big show.
Yes.
And it was just kind of weird. It was like, yes, we celebrated the 25th anniversary, but and for me, it was a huge deal. And for people that were working on the show, I think it was a really cool thing. We were looking back and whatever. But I think people like from like the real big wigs were just like, okay, it's a fight night on Fox Sports 1. And
yes,
it wasn't like this huge, we're going to celebrate thing, whatever.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I'm with you. And I thought it was a bigger deal than it was.
He was very nice when I texted him. He was very nice about it.
Good times.
Yeah.
Now, did you know that like Heidi Androl isn't a career sports broadcaster too? Do you know her story? Like
Well, I know a bit of it,
she
and
was like selling like helicopter parts and stuff. Like she was the same thing. She was in a totally different industry. And then she was on Celebrity Apprentice. And then like she was watching a hockey game in a bar with her friend. And she was like, I could do that. I could do that, whatever. And
okay,
then
so
lo
I
and
didn't
behold,
know that. I did not
yeah.
know that part. I knew she did hockey, and I knew that she'd been doing television a lot longer than I had, but I didn't realize that she
She
just
left
had
like some
one of those
six-figure
moments
job,
too.
like I can't remember the name of the company, but like selling like helicopter parts, like, you know, it's not like selling starters for an ignition for a car. It's like
Yeah,
helicopter, you know, whatever, aerospace. She was like aerospace
sure.
engineering type of sale, whatever. For you though, why did you fall in love with the TV side of things?
For me, it was just the closest replacement I could get to actually fighting. You know, I've talked about this a lot, but I knew that when I had my son that my priorities were going to change, and the biggest thing for me was that there was not an atom weight division in the UFC. And so I just could not justify dedicating my life. I mean, we see what these fighters go through. It's
Yeah.
especially early on. It's a thankless sport. It's really tough. It's a grind. You have to be selfish. And being selfish and being a new mom, ugh, it just doesn't work. So when there was no like mountain for me to climb, really, no peak for me to ascend in the fighting realm, and then I sort of accidentally found myself in this television lane, and I got the same rush of adrenaline, and I got to be close to the sport that I love so much, and I got to be a part of the fighters' stories in a small way. It very much fulfilled at least a good portion of the part of me that didn't want to walk away from fighting. So it was kind of a it's not a direct substitute. There's still definitely things I miss, but it fulfills a lot of the emptiness that would have been there had I just walked away completely. I don't think I could have ever done it.
Yeah. There's
Yeah.
a live show adrenaline to it. And it's
For
like,
sure.
again, it feels weird, like we're not fighting, but it's like when I have a nice suit on and I walk
Yeah.
out onto the arena floor and the lights are going and they give me a microphone and they're like, go, it's a lot of energy.
Yeah.
It's like feels good.
And I know I sound like a psychopath when I say this, but I I like I remember the first Contender series. I don't remember who the fighter was, but he was just covered in blood and like, I'm touching his back to keep him from like moving out of the shot and from moving all over the place. And when the interview was over, my hand and my arm were just covered in blood. I've had guys
Mhm.
accidentally like spit blood on me because they still have blood in their mouth. And
Ugh.
I freaking love it because it's so it's so raw and it's so primal and it's so intimate and it's so like I don't know. The There's something so intimate about fighting that even just being that close to someone who has just gone out there and poured their heart and soul into something is like it's just so cool and I love
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
I didn't lick it though, like that I don't I don't lick
uh,
it that much.
well, I ask you because, and you're in a different role than me, for the most part, but a lot of people ask me like, I want to do what you do.
Yeah.
How do I get there? Or like, I would love that job. What should I do? What's your advice? And really, like my first piece of advice is, and my first kind of thing that I can say as to why that I'm here
Mhm.
is because I'll say I love sports broadcasting more than I love MMA.
Yeah.
Right? Like I'm not here because I loved MMA enough till I just got to the UFC.
Mhm.
I'm here because I loved sports broadcasting enough, and then you carve out your career. Turns out I fall into like the UFC world, and I'm just like, well, this is freaking awesome. Like,
Yeah.
this is the best job I've ever had. But you can't just like love jujitsu so much and then just be like, yeah, eventually you're going to be on a UFC broadcaster. It's like, no, no, no. You gotta learn how to edit. You get like, cause all of those entry level jobs on the way up,
Mhm.
lead to that. But for you, it was obviously different because you
Yeah.
did just dive straight into MMA and then you find the opportunities. There's different ways to do it. But
Yeah, mine
man, you
mine was
do love
almost
to have you have to love like studying the art of
yes.
what we do in a little bit.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, mine was almost the reverse, which made for some really unappealing television the first few years that I was on Invicta, and even, my first year or so in the UFC. When people ask me that question, my answer is always just, you have to have the humility, I guess, to know that you're going to work maybe for free for
Mhm.
a while, and
Mhm.
that you have to start at the very, very, very bottom,
Yeah.
and be okay with the grind of very slowly getting to where you are. And again, that's the perception of my career ascension, is that it's been really fast, but um I don't know, from my vantage point, it hasn't necessarily. I'm still thankful for the speed at which it has taken place. I'm not saying
Sure.
it's been like a 20-year grind, but it's there's been a lot of ups and downs and things that have happened behind the scenes that people just don't see.
Well, yeah, and, even for me, people are just like, "Oh, so, like, how'd you find your way to the UFC?" And I'm just like, "Well, started in college, and then,
Yeah.
it's just like my first job on air was in 2008, and before that, I was behind the scenes in 2007, like, writing news stories about
Mhm.
fires and car accidents, and that's where it started,
Yeah.
and then there's, like, this whole thing. Um, so when you started, like, did you have that confidence, that naive confidence when you started doing the TV thing, or were you very self-conscious about your ability at
I
that
was
point?
really self-conscious, really self-conscious.
And so what at that point made it so that you're a self-conscious person who's in a new thing, the TV on-air reporting,
Mhm.
and what made it so that you could look ahead and just be like, I can do it.
Yeah. I guess I shouldn't say I was overly self-conscious, because I guess I've been fairly comfortable and fairly okay at public speaking most of my life. My dad
Mhm.
did a lot of public speaking, and I went to a lot of those things, so I think it was modeled for me from a really young age. So I guess in that way, wasn't overly self-conscious, but I had never been on television and I'd never held a microphone before. And there's lots of things that I would have learned if I had gone to broadcasting school that I had no idea about, and really had to learn through sheer embarrassment and failure.
I'll say this though, as somebody who went to a communication school, highly regarded with a journalism degree, a lot of the classwork is not it. Like, they
No?
don't teach you how to hold a microphone and how to,
Really?
like, yeah, they like teach you more like theory and like do's and don'ts. And of course, it's journalism. So it's mostly based on news writing and reporting and stuff
Yeah.
like that. And I'm just like, a lot of my work, a lot of it comes from trial and error. It really
Yeah.
does, which means that you can like really weaponize a microphone that's plugged into a computer and just get on and
Mhm.
start talking, and an iPhone that you can set up and just stand in front of a football field and pretend you're like doing a Monday Night Football injury
Yeah.
report. Like, you can do all that. But to your point, you were around it more. Obviously, I was around it more, and for you, it was
Yeah.
very foreign.
I I just fully relied on, and still to this day, to be honest, I guess more so earlier. I knew that I knew the sport, and I knew the sport better than what my teeny tiny record would seem to indicate, because I've
Hmm.
been training a lot longer. And I've always kind of been a person who, regardless of what it is that I'm doing, I always ask why, whether internally or to my instructor or whatever. They would say to do something, and I'm sure I annoyed a lot of people, but I would want to know why we did it that way. Like, don't just tell me to throw this combination and to drift off to the side. Like, why am I drifting off to the side? And I think constantly asking the why of everything kind of helped me to better understand, not just, being able to execute drills on the mats, but understand the, the tactics and then the strategy behind that. And for so long, that it's allowed me to be able to communicate. And the word I like to use is curate, curate the action as it's happening, and do my best to tell the story of the fight itself.
When did you want to switch over? Because I remember having a conversation with you, and I can't exactly remember what it was, but we were in the Apex, so it must have been like 2019-ish.
Uh-huh.
And it must have been season 3 of the Contender series now that I'm thinking about it. But you're reporting Contender series, you're doing a great job. You're on the fight nights reporting, doing a great job. And you're kind of like, I want to call the fights, you know?
Yeah.
And I remember telling you, I was like, it's a longevity thing. Like, as long as you keep doing a good job and you're
Yeah.
around, and I think I used 10 years, which is obviously foolish of me, but well, foolish, and then also too, like, to put a timetable
Probably
on it.
accurate. I mean,
Well, like, I was just saying, like, listen, like, you'll get wherever you want to go, but
yeah,
sometimes it just takes time in the market, you know.
sure.
But obviously it's not always that way. But what made you want to start calling the fights after you are in the reporting role and doing well?
Yeah. I just knew that I could do more. You know, I remember one of my very first backstage interviews, one of my first shows. I wasn't great at forming questions, and what would happen is I would just start to dissect I would start to dissect and analyze the fight, and then like try to
What do
figure
you
out how to
think?
turn that
Yeah,
into a
yeah, yeah,
question.
yeah, yeah.
So
There's
it
a
was
lot of
almost
people
like
that do that.
I was constantly kind of going in that direction anyway. I knew that I could be more informative than a fluid relayer of information. Like
Hmm.
Megan O'Leary is absolutely amazing at what she does, and she and you and John have the hardest jobs of all of the broadcasters. That lane to me is much more difficult. And but I knew that like I could offer more than just relaying information that I had gathered throughout the week, if that
Yeah,
makes sense.
yeah,
I wanted to have an opinion. I wanted to have a voice that people would want to listen to some degree. And I I just it was the first year of Contender series really when that thought I'd had the thought before, but it felt dumb to even think it, if that makes sense.
hmm,
Because
hmm,
we all know that the vast majority of our color commentators are former UFC fighters, other than Joe Rogan. He's
hmm.
the only one, and Joe is in a class, in
Yeah,
and
we had Jimmy too.
and Jimmy, yes,
Yeah,
yes. But there haven't been that
it's
many,
not the
and
norm. Yeah,
it's yeah, and then again, no women in recent history whatsoever. So it felt dumb to even think about it, but I couldn't let go of the thought. And then the first year of Contender Series was when I infamously sent Dana that drunk text and told him that I've told you that story, haven't I?
no.
I haven't?
You sent him a drunk text
Yeah, I did.
that said, "I want to do
I'm
commentating."
Yeah, I said not only did I say that, I said I'm going to be your first female commentator. I will be the first female commentator in the UFC. And I sent it to him like it was after I can't believe I told you this
Did you
story.
hang out with Snoop for a half hour and then you sent it to him?
Probably, I don't know.
Yeah.
It was late at night. I remember that. It was early in the first season and I was just loving it so much. Like that show to me allowed me to have a little bit more analysis because those immediate post-fight interviews, you're
Yeah.
chopping up the fight a little bit more than you do for the Fox interviews, which are a
Right.
little bit more storyline driven. So I was already loving that. And I just I was laying there and I had a few drinks at the Palms bar.
Mhm.
I texted him to say, thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. I love this job so much. And I just want you to know that one day I will be the first female commentator in the UFC. And I sent it and it was like probably, I don't know, 1 or 2 in the morning, who even knows. And I remember thinking like, I probably shouldn't be doing this, but whatever, And I think I was drifting off to sleep when I heard my ding, and all he put was, "I believe you." It wasn't yes, it wasn't,
Right.
"Oh, for
Right.
sure." It wasn't, it was just, "I believe you." And it could have been read, "I believe you think that."
Right, right,
Right?
right.
But yeah, so it this whole journey's really been a series of me kind of being I don't know the word for it, uh brazen, maybe? I don't know, that
Yeah.
has kind of a negative connotation.
Well, I think that something that I'm starting to learn about, and or not learn about, but believe in more and more is the law of attraction.
Mm,
And it's always at play,
yeah.
whether it's by default and you don't tune into it, or you actively think about it.
Yeah.
And I think of times in my past when I'm just like, gosh, like, remember that lucky break that I had, or remember that thing that just fell into place for me, or remember that negative thing that happened to me that I was obsessing over for 2 or
Mhm.
3 months. Like, I hope this doesn't happen. I hope this doesn't happen. But it was all that I was thinking about. And I'm starting to believe that more and more, that we can like tune in. And it's very clear for you of just like how much you've wanted it and how much you've thought about it,
Mhm.
where it's like, I mean, these like meditation gurus will just say, well, that's law.
Yeah.
It's law that it'll happen if you emotionally feel it, if you emotionally teach your body to get into that state of what it's going to be like
I
when it
picture it all the
happens,
time. I
then
picture it all
it's
the time.
law that it will happen.
Yeah. I for the longest time, I would pack it was always important to me, or I always felt strongly that I would have to look very different when I was doing analyst or commentary work, because it's really hard to change lanes from being a traditionally female role of a sideline reporter who, a lot of times, you'd kind of dress to look cute and you've got your dress on, and like it's there's sort of a model there, there's a mold there, and it's really tough to take the audience, or to take me and put me in this other lane and expect the audience to just go, "Oh yeah, this makes sense." So subtle things like the way that I would dress, I knew
Mhm.
that I would be dressing differently when I would be an analyst and a commentator. So I used to pack a blazer for like every trip that we would go on, just in case one of the guys got, a raging case of food poisoning or something.
Right, right, right.
Not that they would have called me, and they probably wouldn't have, but for me it was that manifesting, like if I just continue to believe that this is a possibility, and I continue to envision it and see it very clearly in my mind, and know that it could be true, it's going to be true one day.
Mhm.
And here we are,
February 4th.
February 4th.